The walls. We build. Valeria Mendez stepped onto the construction site, her boots crunching on gravel as she surveyed what would become Chicago's most ambitious urban renewal project. At 32, she had fought her way to becoming one of the city's most sought-after landscape architects, specializing in sustainable urban ecosystems. Her designs weren't just beautiful, they were functional works of art that breathed life into concrete jungles. This is where you want to put the vertical gardens? Directly facing west? The skepticism in the man's voice made her turn sharply. She hadn't noticed him approach. Tall, with dark hair brushed casually back from a face that belonged on magazine covers rather than construction sites. His tailored coat seemed absurdly out of place among the dirt and machinery, yet he moved with the confidence of someone who belonged everywhere he went. "Mr. Devereaux, I presume." Valeria extended her hand, keeping her expression neutral despite her irritation. "The western exposure provides optimal sunlight patterns for the specific native species I've selected. The calculations are all in my proposal." Theo Devereaux, tech genius turned venture capitalist and the primary investor in the Riverfront Revival project. His company, Horizon Innovations, had disrupted everything from smart home technology to sustainable energy. At 38, he had more money than most small countries, and, if rumors were true, the emotional availability of a brick wall. "I've read your proposal." Ms. Mendez' impressive theory. But theories don't always translate to reality. He took her hand briefly, his grip firm and businesslike. "And please call me Theo. Mr. Devereaux makes me feel like my father." "Then you should call me Valeria," she replied, withdrawing her hand and turning back to the site plans. "And my designs aren't theories. The Parkside Commons project in Denver has been thriving for 3 years using the same principles." "I know. I visited last month." His admission surprised her. "Your work there is why I insisted the developers bring you on for this project." Valeria raised an eyebrow. This wasn't what she'd expected. Most investors like him wanted to slash budgets and maximize profit margins, not champion experimental green architecture. "Then why question my design choices?" she challenged. "Because $100 million deserves more than blind faith, even in someone as talented as you." His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "I don't invest without understanding every detail." Something in his intensity made Valeria uncomfortable. Not because it was threatening, but because it felt familiar. She recognized the drive to control variables, to build perfect systems that wouldn't fail. She'd seen that same focused determination in her mirror for years. "My father believed in blind faith," Valeria said, surprising herself with the personal disclosure. "He invested everything in my mother's dreams, and when she left us both for a new life in Paris, he never recovered. I learned early that passion without pragmatism is just expensive heartbreak." Theo's expression shifted subtly. "My experiences taught similar lessons, though with different characters." He gestured toward the river. "Walk with me. I'd like to hear more about the water reclamation system you've proposed." As they walked the perimeter of what would become Chicago's most innovative mixed-use development, Valeria found herself drawn into a surprisingly technical conversation. Unlike most investors who nodded blankly at her explanations, Theo asked insightful questions that challenged her thinking. "You've actually studied environmental engineering," she realized aloud. "Among other things, I make it a point to understand the fundamentals of anything I put my money into." There was a hint of defensiveness in his tone. "People see the wealth and assume I'm just another rich guy playing with toys I don't understand." "And are you?" Valeria asked boldly. His laugh was unexpected, genuine and warm, contradicting everything she'd heard about the cold, calculating Theo Devereaux. "I'm definitely playing, but I like to think I understand my toys very well." By the time they parted ways, Valeria had reluctantly revised her opinion. Theo Devereaux wasn't just another arrogant investor. He was dangerously intelligent and unexpectedly passionate about sustainable development. What she hadn't decided was whether that made working with him better or infinitely more complicated. What, she couldn't know then, was that their collaboration would shake the foundations of walls both had spent years perfecting, walls built not from concrete and steel, but from hard-learned lessons about the dangers of opening one's heart. Unexpected harmony. 3 weeks into the Riverfront Revival project, Valeria found herself actually looking forward to her meetings with Theo. Their initial tension had evolved into a rhythm of challenging, Debates and unexpected collaboration that energized her creative process in ways she hadn't experienced before. You're suggesting we move the community gardens to the rooftop? Valeria studied the digital mock-up Theo had sent over that morning. They sat in her temporary office at the construction site, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across her drafting table. That wasn't in the original plans. The soil testing came back with higher contamination levels than expected in the northwest quadrant, Theo explained, leaning forward in his chair. His sleeves were rolled up, jacket long discarded in the summer heat. Rather than delay for remediation, what if we repurpose that area for the amphitheater and move the gardens up? The structural engineers confirmed the building can support the additional weight. Valeria tapped her stylus against her tablet, considering. The rooftop would actually provide better protection from urban pests, and we could integrate the rainwater collection system more efficiently. She made a quick sketch, ideas flowing. We'd need to adjust the windbreaks to account for the height, but it could work beautifully. That's what I thought. The satisfaction in his voice wasn't smug, as she might have expected, but quietly pleased. Your adaptability is refreshing. Most designers I've worked with treat their initial concepts as sacred texts. The best designs evolve, Valeria shrugged, though she felt an unexpected warmth at the compliment. My grandmother was a seamstress in Oaxaca. She used to say that the difference between an amateur and a master isn't in avoiding mistakes, it's in knowing how to incorporate them into something even more beautiful than the original vision. Theo's expression softened. Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman. She was. She raised me after my mother left. Valeria hadn't intended to share that detail, but something about the quiet moment made it slip out. What about you? Any family wisdom that shaped your approach to business? A shadow crossed his face. My grandfather. He built a manufacturing company from nothing, then lost it all trusting the wrong partner. Before he died, he told me, protect what you build, Theo. The moment you relax your guard is the moment you lose everything. That's a heavy legacy to carry, Valeria observed. It served me well, Theo replied, his tone indicating the subject was closed. He glanced at his watch. I should go. I have a call with investors in Singapore at 8. As he gathered his things, Valeria noticed the dark circles under his eyes. When was the last time you took a day off, Devro? He paused, seeming genuinely puzzled by the question. I'm not sure why. Because even brilliance needs rest. She surprised herself with her boldness. And because the botanical gardens are hosting an exhibition on climate-adaptive species tomorrow, that's directly relevant to our project. I'm going in the morning. Theo hesitated, and for a moment Valeria regretted the impulse. They worked well together, but that didn't make them friends. What time? He finally asked. 10. I could text you the details. Do that. He nodded, his expression unreadable as he left. The next morning, Valeria didn't really expect him to show. Yet there he was at the garden entrance, dressed in jeans and a simple button-down shirt that made him look younger. Less like the formidable businessman and more like someone who might actually enjoy something as simple as a walk among plants. You came, she said. Unable to hide her surprise, I'm interested in climate-adaptive species, he replied, with a hint of defensiveness. But as they wandered through exhibits of drought-resistant prairie grasses and flood-tolerant wetland plants, Valeria noticed Theo gradually relaxing. By the time they reached the experimental greenhouse, he was animatedly discussing the potential applications of mycorrhizal networks in urban soil restoration. You know, Valeria said as they paused before a display of vertical farming techniques. For someone who built his fortune on technology, you have an impressive understanding of biological systems. Technology and nature aren't opposites, Theo replied, studying a hydroponic setup. The most elegant technological solutions mimic natural processes. That's what drew me to your designs initially. They don't force artificial systems onto natural spaces. They enhance what's already there. The genuine admiration in his voice caught Valeria off guard. Few people truly understood her philosophical approach to landscape architecture. They ended up spending the entire day at the gardens, their conversation flowing from professional challenges to personal philosophies. Over lunch at the garden cafe, Valeria found herself laughing at Theo's dry observations about the tech industry's excesses. Wait, You turned down $1 billion acquisition offer because the CEO insisted on replacing your product designers with his team? Valeria asked incredulously. The best innovations come from teams that trust each other, Theo said simply. Money can't buy that kind of synchronicity. As afternoon turned to evening, they lingered over coffee, neither seeming eager to end the day. When Valeria mentioned her struggle to find contractors willing to work with experimental materials, Theo immediately offered connections. I know people who specialize in sustainable construction. I could introduce you. Why would you do that? Valeria asked, suddenly wary. In her experience, offers of help always came with expectations. Theo seemed to sense her retreat. Professional courtesy, he said carefully. Nothing more. But the way he watched her face suggested something more complex than professional interest. Something that made Valeria simultaneously want to lean closer and run in the opposite direction. As they parted ways outside the garden, an awkward moment hung between them. Too familiar for business associates. Too cautious for friends. Thank you for today, Theo said finally. It was unexpectedly enlightening. The plants or the company? Valeria asked with a small smile. Both. His honesty disarmed her. See you Monday, Valeria. Watching him walk away, Valeria felt a distinct unease. She had built her career on careful planning, on systems where every variable was accounted for. Theo Devereaux, with his perceptive questions and unexpected vulnerabilities, was becoming a variable she hadn't planned for and couldn't easily dismiss. What troubled her most wasn't the growing professional respect or even the tentative friendship. It was the quiet voice wondering what other walls might crumble if she continued to let him in. When the foundation cracks. What do you mean the environmental permits are being challenged? Valeria stared at the email on her screen, disbelief giving way to a cold dread that settled in her stomach. After 6 months of meticulous planning and execution, the Riverfront Revival project had been progressing ahead of schedule. Until now. A group called Heritage Development Coalition filed an injunction yesterday. Her assistant, Renata, looked as confused as Valeria felt. They're claiming our water management system might compromise the structural integrity of neighboring historic buildings. That's absurd. Valeria pulled up the technical specifications. Our system reduces groundwater pressure. If anything, it improves structural stability for the entire district. They've commissioned a counter-report. Renata hesitated. From Westbrook Engineering. Valeria's blood ran cold. Julian Westbrook had been her mentor early in her career, until she rejected his romantic advances and then publicly challenged his outdated approaches to urban drainage systems at a conference. His vindictiveness was legendary in the industry. This isn't about environmental concerns, Valeria said quietly. This is personal. 3 hours later, after frantic calls to lawyers and environmental consultants, Valeria stood on the now quiet construction site, staring at the half-completed structures that represented the most ambitious project of her career. The late September wind whipped around her, carrying the first chill of autumn. I thought I'd find you here. Theo's voice startled her. He approached with 2 coffee cups, offering one to her. I heard about the injunction. Valeria accepted the coffee gratefully, the warmth seeping into her cold fingers. News travels fast. In business, bad news always does. Theo's expression was uncharacteristically gentle. Want to tell me what's really going on? Something in his tone broke through her professional composure. The stress of the past months, the pressure of proving herself on such a visible project, the increasing complexity of her feelings toward Theo, and now this deliberate sabotage, overwhelmed her carefully constructed defenses. Julian Westbrook. She practically spat the name. The engineer behind the counter report. He's had a vendetta against me for years. As the story spilled out, the mentorship that turned inappropriate, her rejection, his subsequent campaign to undermine her credibility. Valeria felt ashamed of her emotional display, yet couldn't seem to stop the flow of words. The worst part is, this isn't even about me, she concluded bitterly. 200 jobs, affordable housing units, green space that would serve thousands of residents, all potentially delayed or derailed because one man's ego can't handle rejection. Theo had listened silently, his expression darkening with each new detail. When he finally spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. What do you need? What, to fight this? What resources do you need? Valeria shook her head. This isn't your battle, Theo. It became my battle the moment someone tried to sabotage our project. The intensity in his eyes surprised her. But more importantly, it became my battle when someone tried to hurt you. The simple declaration hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither had acknowledged before. For months they had maintained the fiction that their relationship was purely professional. Despite the late-night conversations that had nothing to do with work, despite the way they had begun to anticipate each other's thoughts, despite the electricity that sometimes crackled between them when their hands accidentally brushed. "I don't need a white knight," Valeria said finally, though without her usual sharpness. "Good, because I'm not offering to be one." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I'm offering to be a partner." Different skill set entirely. Over the next 2 weeks, Valeria witnessed a side of Theo she had only heard rumors about. The strategic brilliance that had built his empire. He didn't throw money at the problem as she had half expected. Instead, he leveraged connections, organized a coalition of respected environmental engineers to review their plans, and somehow unearthed documentation of similar tactics Westbrook had used against other women in the industry. They worked side by side, sometimes until dawn, building their defense. In those intense days and nights, the last pretenses of mere professional collaboration dissolved. They moved together with the synchronicity of dancers who had found their perfect partner, anticipating needs, strengthening weaknesses, challenging each other to greater heights. The night before their hearing with the City Planning Commission, they were preparing final arguments in Theo's penthouse office when Valeria made a breakthrough. "Look at this." She pointed to an anomaly in the soil testing reports. Westbrook's data shows contamination patterns that are physically impossible based on groundwater flow. He falsified the data. Theo studied the evidence, then looked up with a wolfish grin. He made a mistake. A fatal one. Valeria felt a surge of vindication, quickly followed by exhaustion as the adrenaline that had sustained her for days suddenly ebbed. Theo must have noticed, because his expression softened. "You should rest. Tomorrow's going to be intense. So should you," she countered, noticing the shadows under his eyes. Neither moved. In the quiet of the late-night office, with the city lights spread out below them like stars, something shifted in the air between them. "Why are you doing all this, Theo?" Valeria finally asked the question that had been haunting her. "This level of involvement goes beyond protecting an investment." He held her gaze for a long moment, then looked away. "Because for the first time in my life, I care more about someone else's dream than my own." The simple honesty in his voice cracked something open inside Valeria. A vault where she had locked away possibilities she'd never allowed herself to consider. "That terrifies you, doesn't it?" she whispered, recognizing the fear in his eyes because it mirrored her own. "Completely." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "I built my life around never needing anyone this much." Valeria took a step closer, her heart thundering. "And I built mine around never letting anyone matter this much." When his hand tentatively touched her cheek, she didn't pull away. For two people who had mastered the architecture of isolation, this moment of connection felt like stepping off a cliff, terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. "If this goes wrong," Theo started. "It probably will," Valeria finished, with the pragmatism that defined her. "Most beautiful things do eventually. Is that a reason not to try?" His question contained all the vulnerability he'd spent a lifetime concealing. Instead of answering with words, Valeria closed the distance between them. Their first kiss held all the restrained passion and careful tenderness of two people who had forgotten how to trust, but desperately wanted to remember. When they finally parted, Valeria rested her forehead against his. "Whatever happens tomorrow with the project, it changes everything, doesn't it?" "Yes," Theo answered simply. "And that's the most frightening and wonderful thing I've ever said." For two people who had built their lives around control and certainty, stepping into the unknown together was the bravest blueprint either had ever designed. The risk of surrender, they won the hearing. Westbrook's falsified data crumbled under expert scrutiny, and the Planning Commission not only dismissed the injunction, but also issued a formal commendation for the Riverfront Revival's innovative environmental approaches. The victory should have been unalloyed sweetness, yet as October faded into November, both Valeria and Theo found themselves navigating unfamiliar emotional terrain. with far less confidence than they brought to their professional challenges. "You're distracted," Theo observed one evening as they reviewed updated construction timelines in his home office. The space reflected his personality, minimalist yet warm, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city and shelves lined with books on everything from quantum physics to Renaissance architecture. Valeria glanced up from her tablet. "Just tired. We're back on schedule, but I've been putting in extra hours to make up for lost time." It wasn't entirely a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Since that night when everything changed between them, they had been circling each other cautiously, stealing moments of intimacy but retreating whenever vulnerability threatened to become too overwhelming. Theo set aside his papers and studied her face. That's not it. His perceptiveness, once purely professional, had become personal in ways that sometimes left Valeria feeling exposed. "You've been pulling back. From the project. From me." The directness was so characteristic of him. No games, no manipulation, just honest questions that demanded equally honest answers. Valeria stood and walked to the windows, watching the first snowflakes of the season drift past the glass. "I had dinner with my father last night," she said finally. "He asked about you." "And that's a problem?" Theo joined her at the window, careful to maintain a small distance. "He said I looked happy." Valeria turned to face him. "It terrified me because he was right. I'm happy, and I don't know what to do with that." "Most people consider happiness a good thing," Theo said gently. "Most people haven't watched their father destroy himself trying to recapture happiness after it disappeared." The words came out sharper than she intended. "After my mother left, he spent 15 years trying to fill the hole she left behind. Every decision, every action was shaped by her absence." Understanding dawned in Theo's eyes. "And you're afraid of giving someone that much power over your life, aren't you?" Valeria challenged. "You've built an empire around never needing anyone. Your entire business model is based on controlling every variable." "It was," Theo acknowledged, "until a stubborn landscape architect forced me to realize that the most beautiful systems are those that adapt and evolve, not those that resist change." He reached for her hand, and after a moment's hesitation she let him take it. "I'm not saying I'm not scared," he continued. "I've spent 20 years building walls to protect myself from exactly this kind of vulnerability. But I'm starting to wonder if what I thought was strength was really just fear wearing a convincing disguise." The honesty in his voice resonated with something deep inside Valeria. For weeks, she had been fighting a battle between her growing feelings for Theo and her lifelong conviction that romantic love was a liability, a distraction from the clarity and purpose that had defined her success. "What if we're both right to be afraid?" she whispered. "What if this is a beautiful mistake? Then it's one I'm willing to make." Theo's voice was steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "The question is, are you?" Before she could answer, his phone rang with a special tone he used for emergencies. Reluctantly, he answered, his expression shifting from personal to professional in an instant. Valeria watched as he listened, asked several sharp questions, then ended the call with a terse, "I'll be there in 20 minutes." "What's happened?" she asked. "Security breach at Horizon's main server facility. Nothing to do with our project, but I need to go." He hesitated. "We'll finish this conversation later?" Valeria nodded, relieved and disappointed at the reprieve. "Go. I'll let myself out." After he left, Valeria remained in his office, drawn to the personal artifacts that offered glimpses into the man behind the business titan. A chess set with pieces carved from jade, a small worn copy of The Little Prince in the original French, a photograph of a younger Theo with an elderly man, his grandfather, she guessed, standing before a modest brick building. As she was about to leave, her phone chimed with a message from an unfamiliar number. When she opened it, her blood froze. It was a link to a business news site with the headline, "Horizon Innovations in talks to acquire global design firm Atherton & Associates." Atherton & Associates, the multinational firm that had been aggressively recruiting Valeria for months, offering partnerships and resources she could only dream of as an independent designer. The firm that represented everything she had been working toward professionally. The firm that was now apparently being swallowed by Theo's company. The article detailed how the acquisition would give Horizon a dominant position in sustainable architectural design. Exactly the direction Valeria had been helping shape their strategies toward. Had it all been strategic? Their connection, His interest in her work, even their personal relationship. Was it all just an elaborate corporate maneuver to gain insider knowledge of the industry before making this move? By the time Theo returned 3 hours later, Valeria had moved from shock to a cold, controlled fury. He found her sitting in his living room, the article displayed on her tablet. "Valeria," he began, but she cut him off. "When were you planning to tell me?" "After the acquisition was complete. After you'd extracted every useful bit of industry knowledge from me." Her voice was steady despite the storm raging inside her. Confusion crossed his face until he saw the headline. "That's not what's happening." "Really? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been playing a very long game." The pain of potential betrayal was almost physical. Was any of it real, Theo? Or was I just a convenient source of insider information? "That's not fair." Anger flashed in his eyes. "You know me better than that." "Do I?" Valeria stood, needing the physical distance. "Because the Theo I thought I knew wouldn't make a move that directly impacts my career without even mentioning it to me." "The talks with Atherton started before I even met you," he countered. "And they're preliminary. Nothing has been decided, and that's not the point." Valeria's composure finally cracked. "The point is that you're moving to dominate a field that I've spent my entire career trying to build a place in. The point is that you kept it from me while encouraging me to trust you, professionally and personally." Theo ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. "I kept it from you because of conflict of interest concerns, not because I was using you. The legal team insisted all acquisition talks remain confidential until the preliminary framework was established. And it never occurred to you that as things changed between us, that policy might need reconsideration?" Valeria asked quietly. The silence that followed held all the uncertainty of their situation. Two people accustomed to independence and control, suddenly facing the messy reality of lives intertwined. "I didn't know how to navigate this," Theo finally admitted. "Business, I understand. Clear boundaries, defined parameters. But this us, it doesn't fit into any framework I've mastered." The vulnerability in his admission deflated some of Valeria's anger, leaving confusion and hurt in its wake. "That's the problem, isn't it? We're both trying to apply architectural principles to something that can't be designed or controlled. Then what do we do?" For once, the brilliant strategist seemed genuinely at a loss. Valeria gathered her coat and bag, needing space to think. "I don't know. But I do know that trust isn't built on compartmentalization. If we can't find a way to integrate all aspects of our lives, professional and personal, then maybe this was doomed from the start." As she moved toward the door, Theo called after her. "Valeria, wait, please." She paused but didn't turn. "I need time, Theo, to figure out if what we're building together is worth the risk of demolishing everything I've built on my own." Stepping into the elevator, Valeria felt the weight of their impasse. For two people who had spent their lives creating beautiful, functional spaces for others, they had somehow failed to create a blueprint for their own happiness, one that could accommodate both individual ambition and shared vulnerability. As the doors closed, separating them physically just as fear and professional complications had separated them emotionally, Valeria wondered if some walls were simply too high to scale even for two people who had mastered the art of building. Bridges' blueprints for Forever December arrived with relentless snow and a stillness between Valeria and Theo that echoed through both their personal and professional interactions. On the surface, the Riverfront Revival project continued to progress smoothly. In planning meetings, they maintained a cordial professionalism that fooled everyone except perhaps Renata, who had worked with Valeria long enough to notice the shadows beneath her usual confidence. 2 weeks had passed since their confrontation about Atherton and Associates. 2 weeks of carefully measured words and avoided gazes. 2 weeks of Valeria throwing herself into work with an intensity that left her colleagues both impressed and concerned. The City Council approved the additional funding for the indigenous plant restoration. Renata placed a folder on Valeria's desk one Thursday afternoon. "And this came for you by courier." Valeria glanced at the elegant envelope bearing Horizon Innovations logo. "Thank you, Renata." After her assistant left, Valeria stared at the envelope, reluctant to open it. Inside, she found a formal invitation to Horizon's annual Winter Charity Gala, scheduled for the following evening. A handwritten note was paperclipped to the invitation. "Your presence would mean a great deal, both to the project and to me." The careful wording, simultaneously professional and personal, was so characteristic of the man who had upended her carefully ordered life. Valeria traced her fingers over the precise handwriting, remembering how those same hands had sketched brilliant modifications to her designs, had touched her face with unexpected tenderness, had built an empire while somehow remaining gentle enough to hold her heart without crushing it. After hours of internal debate, Valeria found herself entering the grand ballroom of the Lakeside Hotel the following evening. The space had been transformed into a winter wonderland, with crystalline decorations capturing and refracting light in patterns reminiscent of snowflakes and frost. She recognized her own influence in the living, installations winter blooming, flowers and illuminated terrariums featuring miniature ecosystems. He incorporated your design philosophy into every detail, a familiar voice observed. Valeria turned to find Olivia Chen, Theo's chief innovation officer, watching her with knowing eyes. He's been unbearable to work with these past 2 weeks, you know. Brilliant as ever, but with all the warmth of an iceberg. I'm not sure what you expect me to say to that, Valeria replied carefully. Olivia sipped her champagne. Nothing. I'm just providing context for what you're about to see. He's at the terrace, by the way. With that cryptic comment, she melted back into the crowd, curiosity piqued. Valeria made her way through the elegantly dressed guests to the glass doors leading to the heated terrace. She found Theo alone, staring out at the snow-covered gardens below. The sight of him, shoulders slightly hunched, tension visible even in his formal posture, sent an unexpected ache through her chest. Incorporating living ecosystems into a formal event, she said by way of greeting. That's not standard corporate gala practice. He turned, and the naked hope that flashed across his face before he composed himself made Valeria's breath catch. Nothing about this project has followed standard practice, he replied. That's what makes it revolutionary. They both knew he wasn't just talking about the event. Why did you invite me tonight, Theo? Valeria asked, dispensing with pleasantries. Because I have something to show you. He gestured toward the door. Will you come with me? Curiosity overcame caution, and Valeria followed him back through the ballroom to a private elevator. They rode in silence to the top floor, where Theo led her to a conference room dominated by a large architectural model, a perfect miniature of the Riverfront Revival project in its completed form. What is this? Valeria moved closer, noting the exquisite detail of the model, from the vertical gardens to the community spaces she had designed. This is Phase 1, Theo said, an unusual hesitancy in his voice. What I want to show you is Phase 2. He pressed a button, and panels slid back to reveal an expanded model showing adjacent properties developed with the same sustainable approach, creating a continuous ecological corridor through previously industrial areas. The Heritage District redevelopment? Valeria recognized the area. That's been locked in development hell for years. The ownership is fragmented across dozens of stakeholders. Not anymore. Theo's eyes held hers steadily. Horizon has been quietly acquiring those properties for the past year. The final agreements were signed yesterday. Valeria stared at the model, the implications slowly dawning on her. You're planning to expand our approach to the entire riverfront corridor. Not me. Theo took a deep breath. Us, if you want it. He handed her a document folder. Inside, Valeria found incorporation papers for a new entity. Mendez Devereaux Sustainable Development. The ownership structure showed an equal partnership between them, with a mission statement centered on transforming urban environments through ecologically sound design principles. I don't understand, Valeria said, though part of her was beginning to. What about Atherton? The acquisition talks have been terminated, Theo said simply. It became clear that absorbing an existing firm wasn't the right approach for what I wanted to create. And what is it you want to create? Valeria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. A legacy that matters. Theo moved closer, his eyes never leaving hers. Not just in business, but in life. Valeria, these past 2 weeks have been clarifying. I've built my entire existence around the belief that independence equals strength, that emotional distance equals security. He gestured to the model city before them. But look at what we've created together. Something neither of us could have envisioned alone. The best parts of this project emerged from the tension between your vision and mine, from the places where we challenged each other and then found synthesis. Valeria felt her carefully constructed defenses beginning to crack. Theo, a business partnership doesn't solve the fundamental issue. We're still two people who've spent their lives avoiding exactly this kind of vulnerability. I know. He reached for her hands, and after a moment's hesitation, she let him take them. That's why this isn't just a business proposal. It's a declaration of intent. The raw emotion in his voice silenced all her prepared arguments. When my grandfather lost everything, Theo continued, he didn't just lose his company. He lost his belief that anything good could last. That belief shaped me, made me build walls so high that nothing and no one could touch what mattered. But you, his voice caught, you made me question whether what I was protecting was worth the cost of being untouchable. Valeria felt tears threatening. My father sacrificed his entire identity at the altar of my mother's dreams, and when she left, there was nothing of him left. I promised myself I would never be that dependent on anyone. There's a difference between dependence and partnership, Theo said gently. What I'm proposing, professionally and personally, isn't the surrender of identity. It's the creation of something new that honors and strengthens what we both are individually. He released her hands and moved to a side table, returning with a small wooden box. This belonged to my grandmother. Before she died, she told my grandfather that true security isn't found in isolation, but in having the courage to build something with someone who sees both your strength and your fragility and loves you for both. Opening the box, he revealed not a ring, as Valeria had momentarily feared, but a simple silver compass, its face elegantly weathered by time. I'm not asking for forever yet, Theo said, offering her the compass. I'm asking for direction, for the chance to see if what we've started building together, in work and in life, might be worth the risk of opening doors we've both kept locked for so long. Valeria took the compass, feeling its weight, physical and symbolic, in her palm. And if it doesn't work? If we destroy each other professionally and personally, then we'll have failed spectacularly at something meaningful, rather than succeeding at remaining safely unfulfilled. A smile touched his lips. Isn't that what great design is about? The courage to envision something that might fail but would be extraordinary if it succeeded. In that moment, looking at the man who had challenged every defensive wall she had built, Valeria recognized a truth she had been avoiding. Safety and fulfillment rarely occupied the same space. Her professional success had come from taking calculated risks, from pushing boundaries others feared to approach. Yet in her personal life she had played it desperately safe, building fortifications against the very connections that might bring meaning beyond achievement. The night we met, she said softly, you questioned my Western exposure for the vertical gardens. You said theories don't always translate to reality. And you proved me wrong, Theo acknowledged. Those gardens are thriving exactly as you predicted. No, Valeria corrected him, a smile beginning to warm her face. We proved each other right. Your questions improved my design. My insistence pushed your thinking. The gardens work because we both contributed our expertise without compromising our core principles. Understanding dawned in his eyes as she stepped closer. I'm terrified, she admitted, of losing myself, of losing you, of discovering that some blueprints look beautiful on paper, but can't withstand real-world conditions. So am I, Theo confessed. But I'm more afraid of never knowing what we might build together. Valeria closed the remaining distance between them, the compass still held in her hand between them. Then I accept your proposal, Mr. Devereaux, both of them. When their lips met, it wasn't with the desperate passion of their first kiss, but with the deliberate tenderness of two people who had chosen to build something together, knowing the risks, accepting the challenge, and believing that the most beautiful structures are those that evolve and adapt without losing their essential foundation. Months later, as spring brought the first blooms to the riverfront revival's completed gardens, Valeria stood with Theo at the project's grand opening. As city officials cut the ceremonial ribbon and crowds flowed into the spaces they had created together, Theo squeezed her hand. Having second thoughts? He asked quietly, noticing her pensive expression. Valeria shook her head, smiling as she watched children already exploring the interactive water features she had designed, just appreciating the view. It's not the future I planned. Disappointed? There was still a hint of vulnerability in his question. Valeria turned to face him fully, seeing in his eyes the same mixture of wonder and certainty she felt in her own heart. No, it's better than anything I could have designed alone. For a woman who had never planned on love and a man who had never believed in forever, they had created something neither had imagined possible, a blueprint for a shared future that strengthened rather than diminished their individual visions, proving that sometimes the most revolutionary designs are those we cannot create until we find the perfect collaborative partner.